try to keep me.
So, welcome everyone to Carving a New Path. My name is Andrea Hyland, and I am the host of this show. And if you have not listened to the show before, this podcast began in 2020 as a way of responding to all the change that people were experiencing during the pandemic. And my intention was to talk with hosts or guests who had gone through some kind of a change in their life, which many of us have, just don't even realize that part of it is listening to your inner voice and then following the guidance, which opens up doorways to new things that you hadn't even imagined before. So today begins a second show in a series that my guest Alecia Caine and I are doing. So let me say hello to you first, Alecia, and then I'll go read some of the other things I was going to tell them.
Hi. Hi,
Hi.
Andrea. Thanks for having me again.
Great. I'm so excited. I'm going to tell everyone that the title of the first show was The Mythology of Time. And if you look in the show page, you will see the link to that first show, The Mythology of Time. Today, we're calling it Immersing Myself in Kairos Time with the Goddesses in Italy. So this will be the next part of the story that started with the first show. And just if you haven't listened to that, Alecia went from a stressed out, depressed CPA and empty nester to following a faint, quiet voice from her heart, urging her just to go to Italy, where she received gifts from the goddesses that healed her relationship with time and her life. Now she is an astrologer and guide, supporting women to birth their highest self and create their next renaissance. This is the time, yes, for that. And I want to just also say to everyone that there are some links to a blog post and social media links. And if you want more information about what Alecia is offering program wise, send her an email. Go to her email address because I will tell you she's got some exciting things coming up. And we're not ready to talk about those yet on this show, but I just want to say get connected to her because she's going to be doing some really cool stuff. She's always doing cool stuff, but it's more is coming up in this next year.
Mm.
So, okay. So before we got on the show, it was like, where do we begin? Well, I feel like we begin where you arrived in Italy. And I don't know if there's anything you want to fill the listeners in on to
Well,
get them ready for this part of the story, but I'm just going to turn it over to you.
okay. Well, so I followed my heart. I went to my therapist to make sure I wasn't losing my head because I
Mhm.
was really in a bad place and I don't want to make big decisions coming from there. But something said, go to Italy, seeing those pictures of a home for sale there in a little village. And my therapist just assuring me that I just should go and be curious. I don't have to make any decisions. Just go to Italy and see what happens. It's like you can't know what's around the corner until you take that first step and then you can see. And there's no sense making any decisions without knowing. So I went, "Oh, that makes sense."
Mhm.
Bought my ticket. And within 10 days I landed and
Well, and I want to just say to everyone, just realize that
mm,
that that you can have this flash of an idea, something that feels really true to you in your heart, in your body, and it's good to find some trusted people or to
mm,
take a breath on it to check in to, is this a reaction to something? Is this really coming from my heart? And I appreciate how you started with that because I
yeah,
think it's something for us all to realize that a leap is not really from, I get this idea leap. It's actually, there's some other prep
Yeah,
work that
it can be
goes.
dangerous to just leap.
Mhm.
And you can get
Yes.
all banged up, and that might be your path, but I'd rather take it a little more cautiously. And it gives what it does is, I think it gives our mind time to sort of catch up.
Mhm.
I mean, we're
I
kind of
love that.
taught, yeah, we're taught like, don't follow your heart, follow the logic,
Mhm.
or follow your heart, like ignore the logic. And it depends on what kind of person you talk to giving you this kind of advice. A very logical person, obviously, don't follow your heart, you're gonna hurt yourself.
Mhm.
So I like to say, and I've coached so many women who became entrepreneurs who wanted to follow their heart, but there was that, it's like, give it some time and let your heart and your brain, there's a reason for our intellect, let it catch up. Sometimes it's slow, or sometimes it's too cautious. But when you become curious, you satisfy that yearning, and you get information, and the information is what kind of calms down the head is like, and then you're in alignment, like, okay, you're taking your risk, but it's a calculated risk. So I really felt that I was every step of the way. Yeah, some of it took my breath away, but I've traveled before by myself. That was not a problem. For some people, that's the biggest challenge right there, is just going on a trip by yourself. And that's another story, another show. But for
Well, and I
sure,
think that I want to jump in here because I feel like that's where the logic comes in, actually. It's like following your heart and then saying, does any of this make sense? Yes, I am someone who's traveled alone. That was part of the logic for you. I am that you are someone who has traveled alone.
mhm,
You've traveled in Europe. You've led people on trips in Europe. It's like there was some logic to this.
yeah, I could
Um,
trust myself in a lot of ways.
yes, yes, exactly. And I feel like that's where the logic comes in.
Yeah,
It's sort of like if it's like go climb Kilimanjaro next week and you've never had any kind of training, no interest, no, whatever that the logic would be like there are probably more preparation steps if you really feel a calling to do that
yeah,
and check it out more.
yeah. So I think that's why this was on my path, and I had gone down that path up to a point many times in my life. So yeah, and I spoke another language. I spoke French. I did not speak Italian, but I learned very quickly to speak French with an Italian accent, and everybody understood me. So I did have some trust in my ability to like go and see, and then I'll whatever came after that was me really trusting that if I make the biggest mistake of my life, well, it wouldn't have been that big a mistake. Like, what if I actually bought a house there? I went through all these things. So I went, and honestly, the first impression was a rundown Italian village that I had no interest in being in.
Hmm.
Oh boy, all my friends in Italy are going to hear that. But I think we can all admit that there was, I didn't choose it.
Hmm.
I didn't have a list that said all the places. It wasn't a logical decision. It was
Hmm.
like this place called to me. And
Hmm.
my first impression was just, I was a little nervous and scared, and I just saw for face value. I gave myself some time to be there, and I traveled around. And again, it's like the faint voice, like every step of the way, I went and explored, and I just stopped, and I would just tune in to my heart, to the moment. And it was also around the eclipse season, which is
Mm.
interesting because it was in 2015, the eclipse, the nodes were in the opposite places they are now. So the North Node was in Libra.
Oh,
Right
interesting.
now, the North Node is in Aries. So there's there was something that I needed to complete at that time, then or start, that I'm now sort of completing or going on to the next phase.
Hmm.
But that was interesting, and also it was my Chiron return. I turned 50. I ended up I bought a place in Italy. This sounds like it could be like a midlife crisis, which is what is the Chiron return, when you're not following your own path. And when you're following, your whole life is following the expectations of family, other, and society, blah, blah, blah. When it's a Chiron return, you can have a midlife crisis because everything, you're like, what did I do my whole life? And then you start to do crazy things. Well, I had enough of that, living other people's ideas for myself. So I I didn't have a crisis, but I had like this huge leap toward toward my path. That's what Italy became. I didn't know it at the time, um, but it all kind of worked out. So there's a whole story and how I bought the house and everything, and how I connected really with the energy of the land. So that was what I was listening to my heart. And even though what I saw was kind of a bunch of ruins, which they eventually fixed, but I saw that and I went, no, this isn't for me. The land spoke to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it really was the divine feminine. It was Mother Earth. It was just in the mountains and in the rivers and in the seasons and in the people. I could just feel that. So I was saying that I didn't choose Guardia San Tramondi. It chose me. It literally sent me these photos and said, it woke me up every night for 3 nights. You must come to Guardia. Like, I've never known Guardia from any place. I never heard of it. I'd never been there before. And like I said, if it didn't have the sea, it didn't have all these places that consciously I would have chosen, but it really, something spoke to me unconsciously, or to my unconscious. And I took a leap of faith thinking, okay, well, the home prices were very, very low. So if I make a mistake, I can fix this. It's not the end of the world. So I took a risk, a calculated risk. And what I discovered was a, a place where, and we were talking about Chronos and Kairos time in the last interview, and how where we live is very chronological. We're living by the clock. In Italy, they don't live by the clock. I don't even know. People don't wear watches unless it's like a piece of jewelry that matches their outfit, because it's very much in that social conscious.
But they don't have their phone with them at all times, checking or their Apple Watch.
Well, that's another
Tapping.
story. But they'll text their friends. They're talking
Okay.
to people. I once remember I was asking for a recommendation for a particular restaurant, and to an Italian, and he looked at his phone, and I thought he was, well, certainly he's looking at Yelp or something, Google. No, he was calling a cousin to say, "Do you know a place that we?" It's like more. It's
Hmm.
it's more community, more family. It's not, we're not using the technology here. Everything's done by hand still.
Hmm.
And so things are slower. And I felt like Alice in Wonderland. I went down the rabbit hole and found myself in a completely different time warp. Like, time was different. Time slowed down, and time sped up when there was a moment that it needed to go faster. And then if there was a beautiful sunset, with a glass of wine, then you would stop and you would take the time to enjoy that moment. It's so like it expanded. And a lot of times here, like, how many sunsets have I rushed past because I had to get to the next appointment, or there was something was tugging at me time wise, and how many glasses of wine did I miss enjoying? um, in Italy, it's everybody there. It's like the society. It's the way people grow up. You know, you take time to enjoy life,
Mhm.
um, and talk to your family. Mother calls, you stop everything, even if you're with a client. Yes, mama. See, mama, cosa boy, what do you want? It's like
Uh-huh.
it's annoying, but you take the time for things like that.
Mhm.
So I found myself after, I lived there for 9 years, 6 months for each of the last 9 years I've been in Italy. And
Just
so,
wow.
yeah, it flew. When I come here, it feels like, wow, that's gone. It flew. When I was there, because I would live here in I was either California, now I'm in Cincinnati, but in the US, and I did my work, I did all the things that I had to do, got all that done because I only work seasonally as a CPA.
Mhm.
Went to Italy. It took me like sometimes it would take 3 to 4 weeks just to unwind,
Mhm.
and just to like get it adapt to the whole when Americans come over, I can see how they're very much living by the clock, and they're making, they want to renovate their house, and the workers don't show up on time, or it takes a month to get the internet connected. That would never happen back home. It's like, yeah, but you're not back home. So the adjustment, it takes time, and not everyone can make that adjustment. It took me a few weeks every year, every time I went there, to just, okay, let me adjust to the rhythm of where I am. And by slowing down and immersing myself in what I call and what it is Kairos time. It's appreciating moment to moment and tuning in to the present moment,
Mhm.
and being present is where it's like the magic happens. Like, spontaneously, things will just come into my path. Funny things like, um you're just walking and you meet somebody and they just stop you for 20. I mean, I could walk from one end of the town to the next end of the town in 20 minutes, but it takes me a whole day because of the people that I'm interacting with, or getting invited to join somebody at their festival in the next town. I mean, and I would just say yes to opportunities, and it really helped me immerse myself in the community. I became, like, they adopted me there, and I became a part of the dance troupe, the cultural dance. And whenever there was an event, we would do the dance from that their grandmothers and their grandfathers did in the traditional costume. So I'm the only American in that group, and I'm much taller
I
than
remember seeing those
everybody.
pictures. Yeah, they're great. They were great.
It was a beautiful time, and I still have very good relationships and beautiful memories. Um, but the most important takeaway from the entire experience was that time is not as we know it, and I immersed myself in that. Yes, you can experience that kind of magical time anywhere you are, especially when you disrupt your day. You do something different. You know, they say if you just take a different route to work, or just change your habits, or change your schedule around, or eat dinner for breakfast, or
Mhm.
little things
Mhm.
like that,
Yeah.
bring in this sense of wonder.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing I'm curious about, and I know we've talked about this, and but not on the show, and I don't know that I was necessarily brought into it when it first started happening for you. And this is where being in this mindset of Kairos time and changing the rhythm and being in the present moment, you began to explore goddesses. and the goddesses began to speak to you. And so I wonder if you could talk about that, because I feel like that is uh I don't know,
Yeah,
like the
that is a big
outcome
part of
of
it.
or the whatever. It's like it wouldn't have happened if you had been in the rush, 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 or I've got to do this, or I can't stop here because I've got to be here on
Right,
whatever.
right,
Yeah. So
right.
talk about that. Tell us that.
Yeah. Well, the moment that, well, when I first got there, I I wasn't in tune. And the
Hmm.
first, when I after about a week, I just became in tune with the land. And that's where it really started with Mother Nature and the divine feminine. And I felt this like, don't run away. Stay, there's a reason you were called here. And it's like I kept hearing that, and I would walk through the towns and I would see symbols. Like I would see the lion symbol over a door, and the lion um, was a. I'm a Leo,
Hmm.
Leo rising, but I that's like the lion is a strong symbol for me. And I
Hmm.
was seeing lions, statues of lions everywhere. Um, so there was this. I was tuning into a different reality. Like
Hmm.
it was more um it was more magical. It was more like there were dreams involved. There were whispers of there is a reason you're here. And then I would get downloads. Like I'd be walking and they say this idea would just come to me. Um and then I would follow it, and it identify itself as Venus or Minerva. I'm like, okay, these are goddesses from that are Roman. I mean, and from astrology, but I wasn't really that aware of astrology as much as I am now.
Hmm.
However, the gods and the goddesses, I knew I was in this land of Roman. It was Rome.
Hmm.
So all the goddesses, there was energy there. And I was tuning into the energy. So I was there during COVID. I flew to Rome in like July of 2020. So things were still pretty chaotic, but settling down a bit. I was one of the only people on that plane when I flew there. Um, and the magic of that was that my documents had expired. My residency documents had expired, and I had a application, but everyone was telling me, "Oh no, you can't go. You're going to get in trouble." Chronological time, world
Right.
time. Goddess is telling me, "Oh no, go."
Hmm.
I went to nearby. There was a palm tree, an ancient palm tree, because I was living in Palm Desert during my time in the States. And I was sitting under the palm trees, just waiting for an inspiration. Should I go? Shouldn't I go? And I had enough experience that when I really don't know what to do, to just sit quiet in nature. And that I would enter into Kairos time. And the goddesses, the divine feminine, would send me messages. So I look up and there's two owls in the tree looking at me. And I'm hearing them, "Go to Italy." And I actually had a ticket. I just didn't know if I should use it. I was afraid. So I went ahead. Everything fell into place. Things like I had to rent a car and get a doctor's appointment, and just any of those things could have taken me off track, but everything was in alignment. Everything just kind of like it was divinely orchestrated. So these are the kind of experiences that I have that give me confirmation that I'm being led to my path. And when I arrived in Rome and they're looking through all my documents, they're asking me these questions, and I'm like, well, they could just send me right back to California. "Welcome to Italy," was what I got. Benvenuti. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was ready to just kiss the ground.
Mm.
Yeah. So I knew I was supposed to be there. And it just felt, it's like you just feel like you're carried into the next step. You're just carried there. You're not having to think about it. It's not about an appointment. It's just this natural flow. So I was in Italy. I was in I think I was in Rome. It didn't matter where I was. I heard a message, go to Pompeii.
Mm. Hmm.
All right. This story was so divinely influenced. And I didn't want to go to Pompeii. I didn't want to have to go on to buses and trains. I mean, it still was COVID, but they would let us out of our homes on the weekends sometimes, stimulate the economy. They got that going too.
Sure.
Um, so I am like, okay, I went to Pompeii, and on the route there was I had to take a bus and a train, and then the train was filled because there were other people just dying to go somewhere. And so I missed the first train, I missed the second train, the third train. I'm like, well, I'm supposed to be doing this, so I'm just going to be patient. And I wasn't upset like some of the people were upset about it. And that's another thing. If things don't go as planned, and your attitude is just, well, it'll happen when it happens. You're
Mm.
not worried about what time it is. You're just going with the flow. And so I was like, okay, I was okay with it. That next train was train number 1111.
Hmm.
Now, the goddesses must have known that's an important number for me. So they sent me that train so I can know, okay, this is I'm on the right path. There was no mistake. I got on the train. I looked at my watch. It was 11:11.
Hmm.
So I'm getting all these symbols and confirmations in this Kairos time. So I get to Pompeii, the excavations where the archaeological site is, and the message was, go to the Venus, go to my temple, go to the Venus temple of Venus. And there was hardly anybody in Pompeii. There were no tourists.
Hmm.
So it was just magical. I just got to really connect with the energy there without any interference of tourists around, which is very, very rare. But there are so many places near where I live where there are archaeological sites and no tourists because it's not as famous as Pompeii.
Hmm.
But this one said, okay, so there I was, and I didn't know where to go. So I'm wandering all around, and there's the volcano, Mount Vesuvius, in front of me. And it was like Venus wanted me to see, this is what happens when Mother Nature when we humans are out of balance with nature. Because there's the mountain with half of its top that was blown off from the eruption in 79 AD when Pompeii was buried with all the ash.
Right.
And here I was in present day COVID, which was this virus affecting the whole earth because of our imbalance, with Mother Nature. It was almost like a lesson, like, see what happens when you piss off Mother Nature.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm wandering all around, and finally I find the Temple of Venus, which was right by the entrance. So obviously she wanted me to go see all this.
Yeah.
And I sit down and I start to go into meditation. It's the most beautiful spot overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, these beautiful Greek columns. And I could just imagine what it was like. I was trying to imagine what it was like when it was in its glory before all this destruction. And she gave me a breathing exercise that was this freedom of my breath that carried energy to wherever there was a blockage in my chakra, or even a strained muscles, or emotions that are stuck, that cause pain. And whatever stage of trauma, whether it's just um there was a broken heart, there was all this stuff that I was healing from, because I finally had the time in Italy to heal. Like, I didn't have the time to even think about healing when I was here. I didn't even know that I had anything to heal,
Mhm.
really. I was unaware, because we're so busy. It's like we can't even carve out the time to think about, why do I feel the way I feel, or what do I want? And I had time to do that. I must have been there for like 2.5 hours, just breathing and feeling, and then journaling. And then I used that tool to heal myself.
Mhm.
And so that was the gift. That was one of the biggest gifts that I got from Venus, for herself,
Mhm.
and from being in Italy, just just the opportunity to connect with the goddesses and heal myself. And now I'm sharing that, because that feels like what she wants me to do now. So
I love it. And I know that we're going to do at least a few more shows. And so we'll talk. It feels like having Venus as the goddess in that experience is probably enough today, and that we'll come back and talk about Minerva and some of the other, yeah, some of the other experiences. Unless, I mean, maybe I'm saying something and you're like, no, I don't want to talk about that in
no,
person.
we will.
Well, but yeah, I'm feeling like we will. A few of the things to just circle back and have us come to a place of closure for today. I mean, one thing that I was really aware of as you were talking is that you were talking about, as you started to tune in, that ideas, information came in all different types of ways, dreams, whispers. How do you receive information? Is it a knowing in your body? Do you hear, do you have an audio sense? Do you have a vision
Mm,
where you see
yeah.
things? How is it that you
Mm,
receive
yeah, that's
information? Because I think it's important for everyone to understand there's all kinds of different ways. So, sometimes I'll say, oh, I saw this, but I feel it. I feel a knowing in my body.
right,
Well,
right.
how do you experience?
Yeah, that's a good question, because as you heal and become awakened to these sensations and messaging and consciousness, really, um, rising,
Mhm.
um, your other senses wake up. So, like, what we perceive reality is a small fraction of what reality really is. We're just shut down, or maybe we were shut down as a child. Maybe as a child, a lot of it, like, children have all the clairs, the clairvoyance, the
Right.
clairsentience, and
Yeah.
we're born with them. It's natural for us, but it doesn't work in society,
Mhm.
and we're labeled crazy even.
Sure.
Well, when you heal, those senses become awake again. They awaken. And so that was like, I never really thought of that, but that was what was happening. Um,
Mhm.
so initially, I'm an ideas person. I'm a Gemini. I'm an ideas person. I'm a communicator. That's sort of already a heightened um, sensation, or a heightened thing for me.
Mhm.
So a download is like it's like, it feels like a flood of idea in my brain. It's like this flood, and I'll feel it even in goosebumps, like a sensation or an energy around in my body, and it just feels like it's a truth. And I remember studying yoga and awakening to that feeling. So again, I've done that. I paved the way for that. So it it didn't It didn't feel unnatural to me. And it could feel unnatural, or it could feel um, like if you're not aware of it, you're not used to it, you might ignore it and you might not recognize it for what it is.
Mhm.
There's like it's like taking in information from our environment or from the future or from the past or the present or from animals. I mean, from plants. I mean, it doesn't stop. You know, the planets, um, and you may be feeling it all your life, but you're just not aware of what it is. And
Mhm.
so you discard it. But when you tune in, then
And
you
it's something that can be developed, I mean, just for people to know. And although I don't normally hear voices, I can think of a number of times, 5 or 6 times throughout my life where I got a clear command
mm,
of doing something that I heard, and it resonated in that moment that I knew what I needed to do. So it may be that you have a certain sense, and then occasionally in meditation, I will see colors when I have my eyes closed.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
most of the time, I do not see actual visions. And yeah, and I do ancestor work, and it feels like there's an increase of seeing some visions around me, kind of in the peripheral, but not a direct, like some people will say, I saw something right in front of me.
Uh-huh. Well, using the breathing technique,
Hmm.
um, I used it. It would so the breath would go where it needed to go. So if there was a blocked energy center in my body, like the chakras, so I can say the chakras, I know where they are because I've studied yoga and I'm comfortable with how they feel. And I can, if there was a blockage, I wouldn't really feel anything there. But when I worked with the energy and the breath, the blockage would dissipate and I would actually feel energy, like
Hmm.
a tingly sensation.
Yeah.
And I would it so it I worked it from the bottom and then eventually um the other chakras, and it would go higher and higher, and my like I could feel my heart was literally shut down. I wouldn't feel joy, I wouldn't feel love, it would just be like nothing. And then
Hmm.
as I was working with it and really bringing the energy and the breath, I started to feel sensations there and joy, and looking at a sunset or just like things would just overwhelm me, and I'm like, oh, my heart is opening. And
Yeah.
then my throat, and then so the seeing is that third eye, and
Mhm.
you can then, and I don't know how it, I'm not there yet either. I can see color, but when you work with these energies, we have the ability to see, or we awaken the ability
Sure.
to see the answer, to see the future, to see the past. And I know as a young person I had that ability because
Hmm.
I would see things before they happened, and then
Hmm.
I shut that down real quick because I was like, "Whoa, I don't
Yeah,
want to do
yeah,
that."
because it can be scary, because it's not something that's accepted in our society, although it's on the increase that we are
Yeah.
recognizing the difference between hearing voices in a way that we need additional help. And although even with that, I think that yeah, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, learning how to use that superpower maybe is yeah.
Well, I think that when we there's a lot of judgment around um, using our superpowers, or our extra senses,
Mhm.
and they're shut down in an early age because we're not taught to function with them in this
Right,
world.
right. That's it
And
exactly.
so
Yeah,
yeah, so some to the extreme, people can be put into institutions
right.
and
Yeah.
labeled crazy, when really all they need is a shaman to just teach them how to navigate them and use them. And it's a beautiful gift. And I'm all for developing it further.
Hmm. So the other question I had for you is when you brought up Chiron, because for anyone who's not familiar with Chiron, could you say a couple of words or whatever, a few words about Chiron, and does the Chiron return always happen when you're 50, or is there a range? Can it happen at other times? So yeah.
Yeah, no, Chiron is slow. So wherever Chiron is in your birth chart, it takes about 50 years. It's like 48 to 52. I don't know the exact number of years, but
Hmm.
sometimes it speeds up, and sometimes it's slower, but because nothing is, perfectly geometrical up there.
Sure.
So it takes about 50 years to get
Hmm.
back to the same place. So mine was in Pisces, um,
Hmm.
not far from my Saturn return. My Saturn was born. I was born with Saturn in Pisces too. So I'm going through a Saturn return. I went through my Chiron return at the age of 50. I bought myself an apartment in Italy. That was my major
Hmm.
life
Hmm.
crisis.
Hmm.
And right now Chiron is in Aries, 22 degrees, and it's also conjunct, meaning it's at the same um, it appears to be at the same place. It's not the same place, but it appears to be the same as Mars.
Hmm.
And Chiron is it's the wounded healer.
Hmm.
So when you we're all wounded, but when you work on healing your trauma, and this is really interesting because that's what the goddesses gave me. They gave me a tool to heal my trauma. And
Hmm.
then when you heal that trauma, you're kind of like transformed into the healer, because healers are healers because they've gone through hell and back.
Right.
So this is your Chiron is kind of in the sign in the house where you may have a lot of difficulties, a lot of you may have come in with traumas. It may be traumas that came down through the ancestors, through generations. The same traumas get passed down because our ancestors, the the more recent ancestors, I'll say, their consciousness was not as open, and now this us that are we that who are alive right now, we are opening our consciousness. We are awakening to where humanity was way back, when their
Yeah.
consciousness was more open and in tune with nature. So when you heal that wound, you become the healer, and then you help others, because we're all trying to help each other. And that's really the where we're going, is being one, all one,
Yeah.
in our own unique way. So today, Chiron and Aries, if you wanted to really tune into that, um Aries is about um it's about the self, and Mars is happily at home in Aries. So it's about taking action on our own behalf.
Hmm.
And then, right? And then Chiron in there is knowing what you want, knowing what direction you want to go in, but there's a wound. There's like, oh, if I step out in that direction of who I am and what I want, how will I be judged by myself, or by other people or family? So there's like this pulling back. And so it's being aware of that, and going, well, do I want to go forward, or am I okay with where I am and accepting it? Do I know where my limits are? You don't have to commit to everything that you want to do and then follow it through. Sometimes you go, well, I committed to it, but I'm okay. And that's all part of it. So it's a great time to sort of be aware of your desires, and where you may judge yourself and not go forward, or where you're like, okay, I don't have to prove it to myself. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where we're at right now in the sky.
Yeah, I love that. And that your story, and when you arrived in Italy, you were in the midst of a Chiron return, and and that is an example of what it looks like. Yeah. Okay, I feel like, wow, this is great. I just loved hearing your story and hearing about because again, I knew a little bit about going to Pompeii, and it was fun to hear you tell the step by step of that, and the reminder that symbols that are significant to us, spirit will show us in those symbols of, for someone who doesn't resonate with 1111, or they say it's just another time on the clock, they're not going to be given that symbol, except
Right.
that now that it's been awakened in this conversation, it may be that that the listeners see that more often. So anyway, that's just a little fun thing to think about. Anything else that you'd like to say before we close? I mean,
Um,
before we say goodbye?
just that what I did during the last 9 years was birthing my next Renaissance. Basically, I went to the cradle of the Renaissance in Italy, which was where the Renaissance was during the 15th
No,
century,
I
I
know, I
believe,
love it.
and the rebirth of culture, of beauty, of life, of thoughts, of philosophy. And we're going through that again. And we don't know what direction it's going to end up, because there's AI and there's all these, technologies. They could be used for good or for not so good. So it's really up to us to be conscious and aware. And if we're asleep and we're not paying attention, those things may creep up on us, and we'll take more power than we really want to give them. So the being aware will help us create our next Renaissance individually, and where we want to go, using all these tools with astrology and time, and welcoming different modes of time, like Kairos time, and knowing when to step into it and when not to, when to be chronological. So I just think that we can all benefit from my experience, and you don't have to go to Italy for 10 years to do this, but I can bring back what I've learned, and you can create your next Renaissance wherever you are.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you. Thanks, Alecia, and thanks to all the listeners. And stay tuned. There will be a next series, a next episode coming up soon. So
Great.
bye
Thank
now.
you.
Mhm. Bye.
Okay, Andrea.